and welcome to today's public hearing. The time is 10:10 on Monday, September 17th, 2018, and we are located in the second floor conference room of 100 Church Street. My name is Emily Anderson. I am Executive Agency Counsel at the New York City Business Integrity Commission. Thank you for attending today's hearing. The Commission is conducting today's hearing pursuant to the requirements set forth by the City Administrative Procedure Act, commonly referred to as CAPA. The purpose of today's hearing is to receive comments from the public on the Commission's proposed amendments to Title 17 of the Rules of the City of New York. These amendments are designed to improve the safety of the general public. The Commission published the proposed rules that are the subject of today's hearing in the City Record on August 17, 2018. The Commission also disseminated a copy of the rules via email to all New York City local elected officials, the managers of all 59 community boards, several media organizations in the city, and other interested parties. Lastly, the Commission posted the proposed rules on both the Commission's and the New York City Rules websites. The amendments will require licensees to increase the limits on commercial general liability, business automobile liability, and employer's liability insurance, and require registrants to increase the limit on business automobile liability insurance. The amendments will also require licensees and registrants to notify BIC of their driver's vehicle and traffic law violations and driver's license suspensions or revocations, crashes that involve a vehicle used in the licensee's or registrant's business, and to notify BIC of certain adverse actions by any federal, state, and local government authorities, including actions that result in the suspension or revocation of a permit, license, or other permission required in connection with the operation of the licensee's or applicant's business, or a penalty or fine of $1,000 or more. The amendments will also require licensees and registrants to maintain written policies and procedures regarding compliance with all laws, rules, and regulations of the federal, state, and local government authorities. The amendments will also require licensees and registrants to maintain reports of motor vehicle accident, MV-104 forms, and other forms related to crashes, as well as adverse determinations by any federal, state, and local government authorities. The proposed rules that are the subject of today's hearing are being promulgated under the Commission's current authority, which permits the Commission to establish standards for service and regulation of conduct of businesses licensed and registered with the Commission, including but not limited to requirements governing the maintenance and inspection of records, the maintenance of appropriate insurance, and compliance with safety and health measures. Today's amendments are the first step in improving safety in the trade waste industry. Our next steps include pursuing legislation to empower BIC to do more in the safety area and adopting a zone collection system for the trade waste industry. The Commission will now receive oral and written comments from members of the public attending today's hearing. The Commission has been accepting written comments on the proposed rules since the publication of the City Record and will continue to do so through the close of business today. The Commission will also make available a copy of any written comments that are received in connection with today's hearing. The Commission will carefully review and consider all comments and submissions and make changes if the Commission deems them necessary. The rules will go into effect after they are published in the City Record. We will now begin calling those of you who wish to speak this morning in the order in which you have signed in. When you speak, please state your full name and affiliation, and also please spell your name and affiliation, and speak slowly and clearly so that the court reporter can understand and accurately transcribe your statement. We ask that you limit your statement to 5 minutes. The Commission's Director of Policy, Salvador Arona, will now begin calling up members of the public to testify.
Good morning. The first speaker is Steve Shingaris.
Good morning. My name is Steve Changaris. I'm the chapter director for the New York City chapter of the National Waste and Recycling Association. I've submitted the formal written comments to the stenographer. I'm going to try to be conversational instead of reading this verbatim. The written testimony submitted in response to the BIC proposed rule to amend Title 17 of the Rules of the City of New York to improve the safety of the general public, and as noted earlier, it's been posted on the web and to the regulated companies. The New York City chapter supports the introduction of the proposed regulation and the direction it signals the BIC will be going in to further, in its furtherance of its oversight role for the city's private carding industry. We'll make some general comments, some specific questions, and then finish with a final recommendation. In essence, this is a record-keeping and notice rule for BIC permittees. In our analysis, the key to understanding or thinking about it in the context of safety turns on what the BIC will do with this new information that will be provided by the private carding industry. Since the regulation is largely silent on this, we as the regulated community have justifiable concerns about its final adoption and as currently drafted. And other than fines for not reporting certain occurrences within a given time frame, the regulation really doesn't give us a lot of a glimpse into where how this information is going to be used. The second point that we want to mention is that we know that the Trade Waste Commission regulates the maximum rates that can be charged by licensees. Last month, the recently adopted rate cap increase went into effect. During that rate-making process, we talked about the cost of administrative regulation on the industry, and we also noted the impacts of the China national sword and other problems going on in the world of recycling. We used that opportunity then, as we will now, to combine the cost impacts of these new administrative regulations along with the pre-existing call about the collapse of the recycling markets, so that the BIC conducts further rate analysis to grant economic hardship relief to the industry by another increase in the rate cap. If I might, the specific questions that we have on the regulation, first we ask, why is the BIC proposing one of the coverages in a $500,000 increment? We don't know where that came from. Why is the BIC proposing an A10 rating standard for insurance companies to be eligible to underwrite BIC insurance company policies for BIC companies? What are the reasons and rationale that the new proposed BIC limits are going to be increased for CGL to $5 million, business automobile liability to $2 million, and employer's liability at $1.5 million? Another question is, what is the reasoning for the one-size-fits-all maximum not to exceed deductible of $50,000 for CGL coverage? How will the BIC, another question, how will the BIC reconcile the differences between these new regulations and a regulated company's existing coverage in a self-insurance or a captive program, or one with a higher preset deductible limit? And how does another question, I've got 3 or 4 more, how did BIC come to the proposed definition of crash in these proposed regulations? And can the commission, by policy or directive, after this regulation is adopted, alter or refine the scope of what crash-related information regulated companies will be required to provide? And can the commission amend this proposal and add an equivalency waiver or a workaround performance standard provision to accommodate conflicts that are sure to arise between sound existing industry practices in this area and the new practices required by the existing proposed regulation? So finally, the recommendation we're going to make, as noted initially, the chapter is supportive of this proposed regulation and the expanded BIC role in safety oversight of the industry and the trend line where it's going. And we've raised in this testimony many legitimate questions with unknown answers. So it's accordingly, we respectfully request that the BIC put a hold on the further movement of this regulation and make use of a 60 or 90-day period and get further input from all stakeholders, including the regulated companies, insurance experts, safety experts, and other appropriate interested parties. Through that process, we really believe that the regulation proposal can be better for the BIC, can be better for the safety of the citizens of New York, and can be more workable to the companies regulated by the BIC having to comply with the regulation. So we pledge to work with the BIC towards that end, and we are grateful for the opportunity to participate in BIC activities and present these remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. The next speaker is Daniel Wright from Local 813.
Good morning. Daniel Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, Teamsters Local 813. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As the union that represents private sanitation workers in New York City, Teamsters Local 813 sees this industry's safety crisis on a daily basis. Last month, the Business Integrity Commission took appropriate action by suspending the license of Sanitation Salvage to protect New Yorkers from the company's dangerous and reckless practices. Unfortunately, the problems go far beyond sanitation salvage. In most of the industry's big companies, big and small, workers are pushed to the limit with 6-day work weeks and shifts longer than 12 hours. The few companies with safe schedules are the exception that proves the rule. The private sanitation industry is responsible for an inordinate number of fatal crashes. Mukhtar Diallo, Leon Clark, Neftali Ramirez. These are just a few of the New Yorkers who have lost their lives beneath the wheels of private sanitation trucks in recent years. We believe all these deaths were preventable. The industry needs to begin to take safety seriously. It's not about photo ops and press releases. It's about following the law for truck maintenance, not overworking drivers, and putting lives ahead of profits. It's about taking responsibility for crashes rather than sweeping them under the rug, as too often happens among private cars. This is a lawless industry. There are still companies that don't provide legally required boots, gloves, vests, and other safety equipment. There are still companies that are covering up injuries. There are still companies that assign routes that cannot be completed on time without breaking traffic laws. Not every company is shirking safety. There are some good companies that have regular safety training and maintain their trucks. But it's hard for them to compete with the cheap carters who are cutting every corner. That is why Mayor de Blasio's commercial waste zone policy is so important. Until that policy is fully in place, we won't be addressing the fundamental problems plaguing the industry. We will finally have reasonable routes. We will finally have safety standards with real teeth, and we will finally have accountability, so carters have to follow rules or risk losing their contract. Thank you for the opportunity to testify to the Commission today, and thank you for working with us to improve safety in the private sanitation industry.
Thank you, Daniel. The next speaker is Thomas Toscano from Mr. T. Carding.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Toscano, and I'm the CEO of Mr. T. Carding Corporation. I want to start by saying that I fully recognize safety is an issue in this industry, and I commend the City and the Business Integrity Commission for trying to address it. Know that I am in full support of increasing safety for all, and that requires increased standards, and that will be in the form of regulations. As a start, I'd like to briefly list all of the reporting requirements currently on the cars that serve the City of New York. First, there is a customer register that requires 96 pieces of data on each and every customer I have. This is prepared quarterly. Annually, there's a very detailed financial statement due to the BIC. Recently, cars have been asked to provide detailed information regarding their vehicles on a real-time basis for compliance with Local Law 145. We are required to continue to update the BIC on all new employees and principals of our companies. My company actually does this weekly. There are 9 specific journals and ledgers that are required to be maintained by the BIC rules that were designed at a time when most businesses did not use computers. These rules are antiquated and require double bookkeeping to be fully compliant because most computer software programs are not designed this way. Recently, there have been very detailed requests for route data for the franchising study, and this has been required because the data gathered in 2014 was done so hastily and retroactively to rush out a report endorsing franchise. This is not a comprehensive list, but the major highlights have been hit. I start here so we understand the baseline of where we are when this legislation is proposed to increase reporting requirements. Again, and to be clear, I support where this effort is going and its goal, and I understand the need for data to get there. I also support the new insurance requirements with few small proposed changes that have been brought up by my very able colleagues. However, the data requests will give you a lot of noise and thereby decrease your ability to proactively spot safety issues before accidents happen. I start with the definition of the word crash in the proposed regulations. In a highly populated area with millions of parked cars and over 100,000 customers picked up nightly, small property damage incidents are bound to happen. Cars suffer minor damages and carters pay to resolve these issues, many times without going through insurance. Under your proposed regulations, every one of these incidents will need to be reported. For that reason, I propose amending the definition of the word crash to only include property damage over $5,000 or where an injury occurs. This will eliminate reporting of minor accidents on the carters and noise, again, in the data. I make the same general comment with regard to violations, starting with the fact that there seems to be a contradiction in the revised regulations, notably sections 1-12B and 2-05A2. I agree with the $1,000 threshold on violations that is absent in the latter. Another section, 1-12C, deals with vehicle and traffic law violations, and there's no threshold. The violations reporting has two problems. First, it's unnecessary. The BIC already requires me to provide all of my driver's information, and the DMV provides in real time reporting on violations and license action. If my company can access that information, I am sure the BIC, as a government agency, can as well. Second, other types of violations, like most of those in front of the Environmental Control Board, should only be required where the amount of the fine exceeds $1,000. As an attorney, I have fought these violations and been very successful in having them dismissed. However, many companies just pay them as a cost of doing business to avoid spending hours at the ECB or hiring an attorney. My last comment to the proposed regulations is of the part I will call the Code of Conduct provisions. There are several in there that require carters to have written policies regarding compliance with the law. These are extremely general provisions, and I support their intention. However, vague regulations where lack of compliance will only come to light after an accident to assess fines does not get us where we need to be. If you want a code of conduct that all carters are required to follow, let's work together and draft specific actions that carters are required to take or to avoid that are conditions of our licenses. In conclusion, I again repeat that I support this effort wholeheartedly, and I want this industry to be better in all aspects, especially safety. As Commissioner Brownell has said, when one of these accidents happen, we might as well all be behind the wheel of that vehicle, and I agree with that point completely. Punishing companies that are good actors with onerous and unnecessary reporting requirements and vague policy requirements will not make us better. In fact, if this is viewed by carters as a simple revenue generation by the city, it will be made worse because its seriousness will be diluted. Targeted reporting that is designed to flag bad actors before they cause accidents and specific policy requirements are what will accomplish this. I welcome the opportunity to working with the BIC to that end. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. The next speaker is Melissa Iachan.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Iachan. I'm a senior staff attorney in the Environmental Justice Program at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. NYLPE is a member of Transform Don't Trash New York City, a coalition of labor, community, and environmental groups advocating for fundamental reform of the broken commercial waste system. NYLPE strongly supports the adoption of the proposed rules as a modest but important step towards holding private hauling companies accountable for their poor safety practices, the deteriorating conditions of their truck fleets, and unreasonably long hours and routes required of drivers and helpers in this dangerous industry. Given the troubling increase in the amount of serious and fatal crashes involving commercial haulers in recent years, we are particularly encouraged that these rules will require waste companies to report all crashes, driver license suspensions, and traffic law violations to BIC, which can then take these safety indicators into consideration when making a determination of whether a company has the requisite good character, honesty, and integrity to operate in our city. We add that we would like to see additional employee-specific requirements added to the record-keeping and/or reporting obligations imposed on haulers under Title 17 of the Rules of the City of New York, including but not limited to the maintenance and provision of employee timesheets. The promulgation and adoption of these rules alone will not be enough to alter the dangerous inefficiency and race to the bottom atmosphere in the private carding system. If there is no way to enforce or hold haulers accountable for failing to comply with them, there is no point in publishing these rules at all. Currently, despite many existing rules requiring a litany of obligations on haulers in order for them to receive licenses and operate in the city, including the requirement to disclose all employees to BIC within 10 days of hire, we see little enforcement of these rules and few violations being issued for failing to adhere to them. Further, there is ample evidence that the already existing record-keeping and routine and reporting requirements for tradeways haulers are actually violated routinely, despite not seeing haulers issued serious violations or denials for such behavior. For example, the 2016 private carding study performed for DSNY and BIC by Bureau Happold Engineering found that tradeways licensees reported an unrealistically small number of helpers. This is evidence of widespread off-the-books employment of casual or day laborers as helpers, which undermines safety practices and makes these workers particularly vulnerable to wage theft, exploitation, and being unprepared to handle unsafe situations, which can lead to tragedy, as we saw with Mukhtar Diallo. BIC's investigation of sanitation salvage also revealed regular systemic failures by the company to disclose employees, and yet this modus operandi went on for years without repercussion. We believe non-disclosure of employees is widespread in the waste industry, and that enforcement of existing and potential new rules, such as requiring regular submission of employee timesheets and payroll, is a necessary measure. However, we want to stress that even with the adoption and enforcement of more robust safety rules, the commercial waste industry remains in dire need of more significant improvements. Only the fundamental reform and increased enforcement leverage enabled by the upcoming transition to a zoned commercial waste system will ensure that waste companies adopt safer, more efficient, and more environmentally sound operating practices. Under the zone system, the city will execute long-term contracts with a hauler or haulers selected to serve each commercial district, giving BIC and DSNY much greater leverage to negotiate and enforce safety, environmental, and equity standards. In conclusion, we at NYC voice our full-throated support of the proposed rules, but encourage BIC to do much more to raise the standards of operation in this dirty and dangerous industry. We look forward to continuing to work together with BIC, DSNY, the Mayor's Office and City Council to ensure that the upcoming zoning plan truly implements the holistic and transformative reforms that we believe are necessary to actually make this industry safe for all its workers and everyone on our streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. The next speaker is Councilmember Reynoso.
Thank you and good morning to all. My name is Antonio Reynoso. I'm the council member for the 34th District representing Williamsburg and Bushwick in Brooklyn and Ridgewood in Queens. I also chair the City Council's Committee on Sanitation and Solid Waste Management, which has oversight over the Business Integrity Commission. I am pleased to have the opportunity to testify today on important rules being proposed. For many years, I, along with countless workers and advocates, have been sounding the alarm about the deeply dangerous and reckless practices present in the private carding industry. Ultimately, the threats to pedestrian and worker safety come from the often unsafe manner in which companies handle the 40-ton trucks that carry out the work of collecting commercial waste off our streets on a nightly basis. The operation of such large machinery requires the utmost attention to safety, which for far too long has taken a backseat to trying to move through routes as quickly as possible. The proposed rules are an incremental step towards improving safety among private carders. By collecting information on drivers' histories, vehicle and traffic law violations, as well as vehicle driver's licenses, suspensions, and revocations, the agency will be better equipped to identify those drivers with a pattern of unsafe behavior. Furthermore, by requiring companies to report on any adverse action taken against them by federal, state, and local authorities, we can ensure the unsafe behavior does not simply get masked through a lack of interagency communication. I'm glad that BIC is taking steps, but I continue to have my concerns. These rules are only meaningful if they are aggressively enforced. Time and time again, we find that companies have simply disregarded BIC's existing reporting requirements without suffering even minor consequences. This was highlighted most recently in the hearing regarding the suspension of Sanitation Salvage's license, where we found out that the company had failed to register its employees with BIC on numerous occasions. This is highly disturbing when we consider that employee registration is a critical component of BIC's core mission, ensuring that members of organized crime are not active in the industry. I'm supportive of BIC enacting these new rules, but I strongly urge them to aggressively enforce them once enacted. Otherwise, they will simply stand as a hollow gesture of no impact on industry practices. Finally, I want to stress that this industry continues to be plagued by a range of problematic behaviors and practices that will require nothing short of a complete overhaul of the entire private waste industry. The management system through which I believe commercial waste zoning would be the solution. While we work to ensure that the enactment of a responsible and effective zoning system, these rules can serve as a stopgap measure, ensuring that we are doing everything we can to respond immediately to the dangers posed by our current system. I look forward to working with BIC to continue exploring ways we can take steps now to protect the safety of pedestrians and workers alike while moving towards comprehensive reform. I thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you, Councilmember Reynoso. The next speaker is Councilmember Cornegie.
Thank you and good morning. I believe that the height of this microphone is highly discriminatory. So I am Councilmember Cornegie. I represent the 36th Council District in Bedford-Stuyvesant and Northern Crown Heights. I currently chair the Committee on Housing and Buildings and previously chaired the Committee on Small Business Services. So the watchdog of the private sector of the commercial waste industry, the Business Integrity Commission has on more than one occasion come before the New York City Council to say that they need more authority to regulate the industry that they were tasked to oversee. We were all tremendously saddened by the senseless preventable injuries and deaths of New Yorkers by both private sanitation and DSNY vehicles. The level of incidents in the private and city-run sanitation sectors is unacceptable. I believe that we can no longer wait for the administration's mythical remedy to franchise the commercial system by 6 years from now. Franchising is not a real solution to prevent accidents, to put bad actors out of service, to lessen congestion, nor to protect our environment. Today, as we view updated regulations that aim to encourage transparency and update safety standards in this industry, I want to highlight a piece of legislation that I've introduced, Intro 996, which when passed will immediately give BIC the tools to better regulate and improve standards across the board. 996 will immediately give BIC better audit and reporting authority over the private waste industry. By increasing BIC's regulatory and reporting authority, Intro 996 will protect the safety and jobs of the workers in the commercial waste collection industry, especially second chance workers. Protect the over 200,000 businesses in the city who pay for their waste removal, especially small business owners such as supermarkets, storefront mom and pops, and restaurants from losing control of the cost and quality of their service. And protect the environment and quality of our neighborhoods now from bad acting companies. If any private sanitation company fails to meet these new standards, BIC will have the authority to shut that company down and deny them their license to operate. BIC will also have the authority to create new rules to improve safety and to report any action on our streets that may put workers and the public in harm's way. Intro 996 is a partnership with those who work in and are served by the industry, including the Mason Tenders District Council Local 108, who represents the majority of unionized employees in private waste, the New York State NAACP, the National Supermarket Association, the Bodega Association, and Chambers of Commerce throughout the city. When I introduced 996, I had an employee of the industry stand with me named Dwayne. At the rally, he talked about how difficult it was for him after his incarceration to find a job, even with the experience he had. He had been working now in the industry steadily for over 6 years, and like his colleagues, who are predominantly Hispanic and African American, he relies on the industry for his livelihood. He's one of the thousands of people who are employed in this industry whose jobs would be on the line and at risk if franchising is implemented. I introduced this bill with these people in mind, with middle-class jobs being far and few between, and as our city becoming more and more unaffordable, government needs to make absolutely sure that we work to protect these employees and improve conditions, not jeopardize New Yorkers' jobs. The city administration in this proposal to franchise the commercial waste industry has made bold, unsupportable claims that if we wait to study the issue for 6+ years, that all the issues in the sanitation industry will be solved if we implement the system of waste collection, if we implement this system of waste collection. But the city is doing this without any real explanation or examination of any quicker alternative options of how franchising would solve any of these problems. And I believe the city is potentially wasting $8 million on an out-of-town consultant to tell us what we already know from watching these same deliberations on zones in 3 major cities, Chicago, Boston, and Los Angeles. New York City needs to immediately examine all methods available to improve private waste collection, not just pursue a zone system without having an honest discussion about the upsides and the downsides. Chicago and Boston considered franchising and concluded that it would disproportionately hurt small businesses by decreasing the level of service and hurting workers who already experience barriers of employment because they have less than a high school education or formerly incarcerated. Chicago and Boston rejected zones and have engaged in strengthening standards of environmental and safety outcomes for those sanitation companies. Los Angeles, just like the current process that we're experiencing in New York, did not seriously look at the costs of franchising. Their city's process, like ours, was not forthcoming with the hidden costs associated with franchising and made promises of lower prices and improved service that only resulted in the doubling, tripling, and quadrupling of prices. Particularly hurt was small businesses who report that they've had to close off employment opportunities to those who need the job most. And most importantly, Intro 996 works to find solutions that we believe can immediately stop the carnage on our streets. I believe that we can avoid future accidents if we stop the condemnation, finger pointing, and political outmaneuvering, and if we did our jobs in government to pass common sense reform now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cornegie. The next speaker is Jose Maldonado.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony on behalf of New Yorkers for Responsible Waste Management. My name is Jose Maldonado. I'm testifying on behalf of the association's executive director, Kendall Christensen. New Yorkers for Responsible Waste Management respects and appreciates the efforts of the Business Integrity Commission to propose new laws and updated regulations with respect to establishing best practices for all of BIC's licensees and registrants. To date, all of the industry associations have been supportive and appreciative of BIC's leadership in making safety a top priority for all concerned, including facilitating discussions with colleagues at other city agencies, like the Department of Sanitation, Department of Transportation, and the New York City Police Department, as well as collaborating on producing a series of safety symposia and a handbook on best practices. This initial set of proposed regulations are generally thoughtful and appropriately. They speak primarily to requiring better record keeping, timely notification to BIC of various events involving other agencies, as well as crashes of all types, and maintenance of policies and procedures that effectively integrate a wide range of compliance requirements into company practices. Others will speak to particular concerns that should be considered and resolved. Should these regulations be adopted in a form similar to what is proposed, we expect that the industry's associations will work with our respective members to provide active guidance regarding compliance with any new requirements, and will work with BIC to produce guidance documents, workshops, and other means of assisting the industry in meeting our obligations. As the number and nature of these types of requirements expand, it should be understood that licensees must devote additional time and resources to compliance-related matters, which will increase administrative costs for licensees and registrants. If it is not otherwise clear in BIC regulations, guidance should be provided as to the electronic maintenance of records and conveyance of them to BIC, including through electronic portals that enable real-time updates to company records. Specifically, the maintenance of policies and procedures should be clear as to whether they need to be provided proactively, provided to BIC, or made available on a timely basis upon request. For the sake of discussion, the collection of data of the type outlined by the proposed regulations begs at least two questions worthy of further review before they are finalized. The first is the harmonization of new reporting requirements with those of other federal, state, and local regulatory agencies so that compliance can be both simplified and more effective. That means adopting similar definitions of crash and other incidents and using the same reporting requirements and processes. In any event, the definition should be meaningful and rational and avoid sweeping and inconsequential information. The second is the question of BIC's current capacity to receive, analyze, assess additional data of the types requested, given the presumption that they are requested for rational purposes not fully clear within the language of the proposed regulations. If the purpose of the data collection exercise is to provide a better snapshot as to industry performance, the capacity to assess and issue reports should be considered and to use those benchmarks for industry performance. For example, similar to the crash report prepared by DCAS for city agency fleets, will reports be produced? Will new data be included in the mayor's management report? If in fact, the purpose is to provide BIC with additional information related to the performance of individual companies, especially during license renewal processes or under special circumstances outside of the renewal process, the use of the information should be clearly explained and discussed further. The corollary is that due consideration should be given to privacy and other proprietary business information considerations regarding certain data that will be collected by BIC. Now, with respect to insurance requirements, given that insurance markets require a comprehensive and timely understanding of external market through which insurances are obtained, we respectfully suggest that BIC engage in dialogue with knowledgeable experts regarding its proposals and how to make them more effective in light of industry standards and requirements. It has been suggested, for example, that liability insurance is typically sold in $1 million increments, making the proposed requirement or the current proposed requirement of $1.5 million not standard and therefore difficult to comply with. Additionally, the insurance requirements as proposed need to take into account that some larger companies insure through other legal and appropriate means, including self-insurance and other types of risk pools, which the existing and proposed language may not adequately recognize. Overall, we strongly encourage an ongoing collaborative process for consideration of any new regulations as well as proposed legislation, especially as various proposals are introduced by other concerned stakeholders. As we have experienced with BIC over the past 2 years, through the Trade Waste Advisory Board and the working group convened under the Department of Sanitation's Advisory Board auspices, the industry's commitment both nationally and locally to improve standards, technologies, and practices with respect to improving safety is considerable, but those mutual goals are best pursued and achieved when rational and thoughtful people work together and not when safety becomes politicized and weaponized or imposed by one party on another as part of a larger agenda. As initially suggested, these proposed regulations should be considered in conjunction with the laws that BIC will be proposing. The new laws should include ideas from stakeholders, including the industry, and focus on what is most likely to make an effective difference in actual safety of the general public and industry employees. Finally, while we understand BIC's focus on its licensees and registrants, consideration should be given to consistency as to how such reporting, performance, and insurance standards are applied to other transportation-related businesses that operate with various city, through various city licenses, including but not limited to school buses, delivery vehicles of all types. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on BIC's regulatory proposals.
Is there anyone else who would like to testify? Seeing no one else is here to testify, we will now close the record for this hearing. As a reminder, the commission will continue to accept written comments through the close of business. The hearing is now closed. The time is now 10:50.